In the summer of 1987, a decorated SWAT officer vanished without a trace. She was young, ambitious, and one of the few women in her unit, a fighter who had faced danger countless times in uniform. But on that ordinary day, she wasn't chasing a suspect or storming a barricade. She was simply driving home. She never arrived. No witnesses, no distress call, no sign of a struggle. For 17 years, her case collected dust in filing cabinets, her family forced to live in a nightmare of not knowing. Then in 2004, a garbage man working his usual route stumbled upon something so chilling it reopened one of the most baffling cold cases in American law enforcement history. Her uniform, crushed and buried in debris, hidden in plain sight all along. The discovery didn't just raise questions. It forced everyone to confront the possibility that someone had wanted her gone and had gone to great lengths to make sure she stayed gone. Her name was Officer Dana Prescott. She was 29 years old, a rising star in her department, and one of the most highly trained tactical officers in the region. Colleagues described her as fearless, focused, and relentless in her pursuit of justice. She had a reputation for keeping her cool under pressure, and her commanding officer once told reporters she was the kind of cop you want beside you when things go bad. But for all her toughness on the job, Dana was also deeply human, close to her family, a devoted aunt to her sister's children, and someone who dreamed of someday leaving behind the long hours of police work for a quieter life. None of her dreams would come true. On June 14, 1987, Dana finished a grueling 12-hour shift. Witnesses say she left the station around 8:45 p.m., dressed in civilian clothes and carrying her duffel bag with her SWAT uniform inside. She drove her dark blue Chevrolet sedan out of the lot and disappeared into the night. She was expected at her sister's house for a late dinner, but she never showed. When hours passed with no word, her family knew something was wrong. Dana wasn't careless, and she wasn't the type to vanish without telling anyone. By midnight, her car was still missing, and her phone at home rang unanswered. That was the beginning of a mystery that would span nearly 2 decades. The search for Dana began immediately. Dozens of officers combed her usual route, checking roadside ditches, abandoned lots, and gas stations along the highway. Her face was plastered on television and newspapers, her disappearance shaking not only her department, but the entire city. Tips poured in from the public, but none led anywhere. Some swore they saw her car on the interstate. Others claimed they spotted her speaking with a man at a rest stop, but every lead hit a dead end. Days turned to weeks and then months with nothing but silence. It was as if she had been erased. Investigators initially suspected foul play. Dana's role in SWAT had put her face to face with dangerous criminals, some of whom had vowed revenge. But there was no break-in at her home, no sign of struggle in the station parking lot, and no ransom demand. Without evidence, the case went cold. Her car, her uniform, even her service weapon, gone. Her family begged the media not to forget her, but as the years passed, coverage dwindled. By the mid-1990s, Dana's name was mentioned only in passing, a haunting footnote in the department's history. And that's the terrifying part. If a highly trained SWAT officer could vanish without leaving a single trace, what chance does an ordinary person have? Think about that. If someone so skilled, so respected, and so watched by the public can disappear into thin air, it could happen to anyone. That's why we share these stories, because when they're forgotten, the people who took them win. Don't let them win. Subscribe now. Because silence is the ally of those who make people disappear, and you cannot allow yourself to look away. For 17 years, Dana's case sat unsolved, gathering dust while her family held on to fading hope. Her sister, Caroline, told reporters in 1999, "I know she's out there somewhere. Someone knows what happened. We just need the truth." But the truth wouldn't surface until a muggy morning in August of 2004, when a garbage man named Tony Rivera was doing his usual rounds on the outskirts of the city. Rivera was working a quiet industrial district slated for demolition. As he maneuvered his truck toward a pile of debris from an abandoned warehouse, something unusual caught his eye. a bundle of fabric half buried beneath broken cinder blocks and rotting wood. At first he thought it was just trash, but when he pulled it free, the sight froze him in his tracks. It was a SWAT uniform, crushed, dirt-stained, and unmistakably real. The patches were still attached. The name tag read, Prescott. Rivera dropped the bundle and immediately called authorities. Within hours, detectives swarmed the site. The uniform was carefully bagged, examined, and confirmed it belonged to Dana. After 17 years of silence, the first tangible clue had finally surfaced. The warehouse had been abandoned since the late 1980s, used sporadically for illegal dumping and later condemned. Investigators realized the uniform could have been there for years, hidden under layers of refuse that only demolition crews had begun clearing. But why leave the uniform behind? And why there, in a place so secluded, yet eventually destined for discovery? The find raised more questions than it answered. And as investigators dug deeper into the site, they uncovered more: a cracked leather strap that could have been part of Dana's duty bag, and a rusted key ring with one key still intact. Forensics would later confirm the key matched Dana's Chevrolet sedan, the same vehicle that had vanished with her in 1987. Her car was still missing, but the key proved it had once been there. For Dana's family, the discovery was a gut punch. Caroline described the moment she got the call. It was like losing her all over again. After 17 years, to see her name on the news again, I didn't know if I should feel relief or horror. But one thing was clear. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide Dana's trail. And if her uniform had been left in that warehouse, what else might still be buried in the city's forgotten corners? The uniform's discovery ignited the case like a spark hitting dry grass. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, investigators had something solid to work with, something that connected directly back to Dana Prescott. Detectives reopened her file, pulling out old photographs, maps, and statements that had been boxed away since the late 80s. The FBI was called in to assist, given the possibility that Dana's disappearance could be tied to organized crime. And quietly, whispers began to circulate within law enforcement circles. Maybe someone inside had known more than they admitted back then. The uniform was examined for DNA, but after 17 years exposed to the elements, the results were inconclusive. Still, the key ring was a breakthrough. The single intact key matched not only Dana's car, but also a secondary key found in her apartment when it was first searched. This detail suggested that whoever left it at the warehouse had access to her personal belongings, or had taken them the night she disappeared. Investigators scoured the warehouse site for additional evidence, sifting through rubble by hand. But beyond a few scraps of fabric and that lone key, there was nothing. It was as if someone had deliberately planted just enough to taunt the searchers without giving them the whole truth. Theories resurfaced. Some detectives argued that Dana had been targeted by a vengeful criminal she had helped put behind bars. Others whispered darker possibilities: corruption within the force. Dana had been outspoken, unwilling to overlook misconduct. Could it be that her disappearance wasn't the work of a stranger at all? Carolyn, her sister, believed in her gut that Dana had stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to see. In an interview that fall, she said, "Dana was fearless, but she wasn't reckless. If she vanished, it's because someone powerful wanted her gone." Her words carried weight, because by then, the idea that an officer, especially a SWAT officer, could be taken without a trace had unsettled even the toughest cops in the city. In the months following the discovery, tip lines were reopened. Calls poured in from people claiming they had seen Dana or her car years earlier. One caller swore that in 1990, they had spotted a dark blue sedan abandoned on the edge of a quarry 2 towns over. When investigators searched the site, they found nothing. Another caller claimed to have overheard 2 men in a bar bragging about taking care of that lady cop, but couldn't recall details beyond the year, 1988. Again, no evidence. Every lead ran dry, and the frustration mounted. Then, in December of 2004, a man named Robert Delaney came forward with a story that shook investigators. Delaney had been a night security guard at a shipping yard not far from where Dana's uniform was found. He claimed that one night in the summer of 1987, just weeks after her disappearance, he saw two men unloading what looked like a rolled carpet from a pickup truck. They carried it into a warehouse, the very same one where the uniform would later be discovered. At the time, he thought nothing of it. Illegal dumping was common. But when he saw Dana's face in the news that year, he realized what he might have witnessed. Unfortunately, Delaney's memory was foggy after 17 years. He couldn't describe the men clearly, only that one was tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter with a limp. Investigators checked his story. Records confirmed Delaney had worked that job in 1987, and his post had indeed been near the warehouse. His account was impossible to prove, but it fit too neatly with the timeline to be ignored. If Delaney was telling the truth, Dana's body might have once been inside that warehouse, or still was. Forensic teams returned to the site with ground-penetrating radar. They found disturbed soil under a concrete slab near the back wall, consistent with something buried and later moved. Samples revealed trace amounts of fabric fibers and human hair, but not enough for a positive identification. It was evidence, but evidence that left more questions than answers. Had Dana been buried there temporarily and later moved? If so, where was she now? The pressure on investigators was immense. The department had lived under the shadow of her disappearance for nearly 2 decades, and the public demanded answers. News outlets ran nightly updates, portraying Dana as both a hero and a victim. The case became symbolic. If the truth couldn't be found for her, what hope was there for ordinary citizens who vanished? And that's where I need to pause you, the listener, for a reality check. Dana was a trained SWAT officer, backed by the full weight of a major police department. Yet her disappearance was covered up so effectively that it took 17 years just to find a shred of her uniform. Imagine how many other missing people never get even that. Their stories don't make the news, their families don't get interviews, and their cases don't get reopened. If you don't subscribe and stay with us as we tell these stories, they vanish twice. Once in life and once in memory. Don't let them vanish again. Hit subscribe right now, because silence is dangerous. As the months dragged on, Caroline became the face of the search. She appeared on national talk shows holding up photographs of her sister, begging anyone with information to come forward. Her emotional pleas kept the case alive, but behind the scenes, she feared the worst. She confided to reporters in early 2005. "We're not looking for Dana alive anymore. We just want to bring her home." Investigators began to re-examine Dana's last days before her disappearance. They discovered she had recently been investigating a suspected drug ring operating in the city, one that allegedly had ties not just to street-level dealers but to corrupt officials. Dana's notes from that time, still stored in evidence, hinted at her suspicions of an inside leak. Could her discovery have cost her life? Some detectives believed so. Then came the chilling revelation. A retired officer, who requested anonymity, claimed that Dana had expressed fear in the weeks before she vanished. According to him, she told him privately, "If something happens to me, it won't be a stranger. It'll be someone I thought I could trust." Those words cast a long shadow over the investigation. If Dana had known she was in danger, why hadn't she told her family? And if she suspected betrayal within her own ranks, how deep did the corruption run? The retired officer's words sent a shiver through investigators. If Dana Prescott had truly feared betrayal, then the scope of the case was far darker than anyone had dared admit. Quietly, an internal affairs review was opened, not officially tied to Dana's case, but everyone knew the truth. Files from the mid-1980s were combed for signs of corruption, bribes, or officers with unexplained ties to criminal networks. What they found was unsettling. Several officers from Dana's unit had been investigated for misconduct in the years after her disappearance, though none were directly linked to her case. Still, the timing raised suspicion. At the same time, investigators began mapping out all the drug cases Dana had worked in her final months. One stood out. A high-profile bust in 1987 had dismantled a mid-level operation, but rumors swirled that the real ringleaders had never been touched. Dana had pushed for deeper surveillance, but her recommendations were shelved. Some believed she'd been getting too close to powerful people who wanted her silenced. Caroline clung to these developments with a mix of hope and dread. Hope that they were finally getting closer to the truth, and dread that it confirmed what she'd always feared, that her sister had been deliberately targeted. She told one interviewer, her voice shaking, "I don't want her remembered as just a victim." Dana was strong. If they took her, it's because she was standing up to something bigger than all of us. Meanwhile, Robert Delaney, the security guard who'd come forward, received threats after his story hit the news. Anonymous calls, late-night knocks at his door, even a note left on his windshield reading, "Stay quiet." Terrified, he briefly went into hiding, which only added to the sense that powerful forces were still trying to bury Dana's story. In April 2005, investigators finally got a break. A construction crew clearing an overgrown lot near the river unearthed a rusted vehicle chassis buried beneath layers of dirt and debris. When authorities arrived, their worst fears were confirmed. It was a dark blue Chevrolet sedan, the same make and model Dana had been driving the night she vanished. The VIN number matched. The vehicle had been stripped, the interior gutted, and the windows smashed. But it was her car. Inside, they found only fragments of fabric and a rusted hair clip Caroline later identified as Dana's. The discovery of the car changed everything. Whoever had dumped it there had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal it, burying it in a spot that would have remained hidden if not for new development plans. Detectives now believed Dana had been taken that very night in 1987, her car hidden within days to erase her trail. The location of the chassis was less than 2 miles from the warehouse where her uniform had been found. The pieces were finally connecting. But what picture did they form? Forensic analysis of the vehicle revealed faint traces of blood beneath the driver's seat, degraded but still present. Though too damaged for DNA analysis, it indicated violence had occurred inside. Investigators concluded Dana had likely been ambushed while driving. The uniform found in the warehouse may have been dumped there after the fact, part of an effort to scatter evidence and delay discovery. The media went into overdrive. Headlines blared, "Dana Prescott's car found after 18 years." For her family, it was both vindication and heartbreak. Caroline wept as she visited the site, laying flowers near the rusted shell. "This is the closest we've been to her in almost 2 decades, she whispered to reporters. But with every answer came more questions. Who had orchestrated her disappearance? And why, after all these years, had pieces of her life begun surfacing now? Was someone slipping up? Or was someone trying to send a message? That's the terrifying thought, isn't it? Because if someone could bury a car, hide a uniform, and keep an entire city in the dark for nearly 20 years, what else could they be hiding? How many other families are still waiting, just like Caroline, for even the smallest piece of truth? That's why you can't just watch this story and move on. Hit subscribe right now. If you don't, stories like Dana's disappear again into silence, and silence is the killer's best friend. Don't give them that power. Investigators doubled down, interviewing every surviving member of Dana's old unit. Some were cooperative, others evasive. One officer, now retired, broke down in tears when asked if Dana had confided in him. He admitted she had suspected an informant inside their unit was feeding details of raids to criminals. He recalled Dana saying, "If I'm right, they'll come for me before they let me prove it." He hadn't taken her seriously then. Now, nearly 2 decades later, he could only whisper, "I should have said something." The FBI's involvement deepened. Old case files were reanalyzed, wiretap records reviewed. They discovered that in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, several of Dana's suspects had abruptly vanished from the city, as if tipped off. It was a chilling pattern, one that suggested someone on the inside was warning them. Caroline, now exhausted from years of fighting, said publicly, "We don't need theories. We need accountability. Someone knows what happened. Someone in uniform. Her words stung, because by then, it was hard for the public not to wonder the same thing. By late 2005, investigators had compiled a list of potential suspects, both criminal and within the department. But without a body, without definitive forensic evidence, the case remained stuck. Pressure mounted. Dana's story was now a national obsession, but behind the headlines, her family still had no closure, and that's where the case took its darkest turn. A hiker exploring the outskirts of an abandoned quarry in early 2006 stumbled upon something buried in the earth: scraps of cloth, a broken badge, and bone fragments. Authorities were called in immediately, and for the first time in 19 years, there was hope they had finally found her. The quarry discovery shook the entire community. Within hours, investigators swarmed the site, sealing off the area as forensic teams began their grim work. The scraps of cloth matched the dark blue of Dana's Swat uniform, and the broken badge bore the faint outline of her number, though time and weather had eroded it almost beyond recognition. The bone fragments were carefully collected, and preliminary analysis suggested they belonged to a woman of Dana's age and build. Still, the family would have to wait weeks for DNA confirmation. Caroline stood at the site that day, clutching a framed photo of her sister. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered to reporters, "She's been here all along, and we didn't know." Her words cut deep, because the thought that Dana's remains had been lying in an abandoned quarry, hidden in plain sight for nearly 2 decades, was unbearable. As the investigation unfolded, new details came to light. Near the remains, searchers found an old piece of duct tape with faint traces of hair attached, suggesting Dana may have been restrained. A rusted handgun was recovered a few feet away, though badly corroded. Ballistic tests were impossible, but its presence raised chilling questions. Had Dana been executed here, or had someone attempted to dispose of evidence hastily? Forensic teams also unearthed a small silver locket buried beneath the soil. Inside was a faded photograph of Dana with her sister Caroline, taken years earlier. Caroline identified it immediately. "She never took it off," she said through sobs. The find solidified what investigators already suspected. This was Dana Prescott's final resting place. But even as the DNA results loomed, something darker hovered over the case. Detectives discovered signs that the quarry had been disturbed multiple times over the years. Layers of soil suggested that someone had returned to the site more than once, perhaps to check on the remains, or to ensure they stayed hidden. Whoever had taken Dana hadn't just wanted her gone. They had wanted her to stay gone. As weeks passed, the DNA results confirmed the inevitable. The fragments belonged to Dana Prescott. For Caroline, it was both relief and devastation. Relief to finally have answers, and devastation that those answers came with finality. "At least now she's not out there alone anymore," she said quietly at a press conference. The revelation reignited national interest, but it also sparked anger. How could it have taken 19 years to find her? How many tips, how many leads had been ignored along the way? Caroline was blunt. "If the system had worked the way it was supposed to, we wouldn't be standing here today. My sister deserved better." And that's the part you need to think about right now. Dana's case only got answers because people refused to stop asking questions. But for every Dana, there are hundreds of names we'll never even hear. People whose stories were buried as neatly as the evidence in that quarry. If you don't subscribe and keep watching, those stories vanish forever. Think about that. Silence is the graveyard of the missing. Don't let them be buried twice. Click subscribe, because one day it could be your story we're telling. As forensic teams pieced together the evidence, investigators built a chilling timeline. They now believed Dana had been ambushed the night she disappeared, subdued, and taken to the warehouse where her uniform was later found. From there, she was transported to the quarry, restrained, and killed. The burial was rushed, but deliberate. The subsequent discovery of her uniform and car suggested a campaign to confuse investigators and scatter clues just enough to keep the trail cold. One question haunted the team. Why now? Why had these pieces suddenly surfaced after nearly 2 decades? Some believed it was chance, construction crews, hikers, and time finally unveiling what had been hidden, but others weren't so sure. One senior investigator confided to a journalist, "It feels like someone wanted us to find her, or at least wanted us to find enough." Attention turned back to the suspects Dana had pursued in 1987. Several were still alive, though older and scattered across different states. One, a mid-level enforcer in the drug trade, was interviewed under new pressure. He denied involvement, but admitted something chilling. "Everyone knew Dana was too close. We all knew she wasn't going to back off. And then, she was gone. Just like that." Caroline, hearing this, broke down in anger. They all knew, and nobody said a word. Her rage was shared by many in the community, who demanded accountability not only for Dana's killers, but for the silence that had kept her case frozen for so long. The quarry discovery also forced law enforcement to face its own failures. Internal Affairs revisited the files, noting the gaps, the ignored leads, and the fact that Dana herself had warned of betrayal from within. A chilling possibility loomed. Had someone in uniform helped cover up her disappearance? In 2007, a new task force was formed to re-examine the case with fresh eyes. They brought in forensic psychologists, cold case experts, and new technology. By analyzing the quarry evidence and cross-referencing it with old case files, they identified a troubling pattern. Several tips from 1987 and 1988 had pointed investigators toward the quarry area, but for reasons never explained, those tips had been dismissed. Caroline called it what everyone was thinking. They didn't want her found. The truth was closing in, and for the first time in nearly 20 years, investigators believed they were on the verge of exposing the full story behind Dana Prescott's disappearance. The 2007 task force wasted no time. They pulled every thread that had been left dangling since 1987, and what they found painted a picture far more disturbing than anyone had wanted to admit. According to newly uncovered documents, Dana had been investigating not just a drug ring but a network with connections to local officials, and even a few men within the department itself. She had written in her private notes, later recovered from a storage box in evidence, that she believed, "The leak is closer than anyone realizes." Those words, found nearly 20 years later, seemed almost prophetic. A confidential informant came forward in 2008, claiming he had once overheard two men boasting in a bar about shutting up the lady cop. The details he provided were eerily similar to Robert Delaney's story from years earlier. Two men, a rolled carpet, a late-night trip to the warehouse. When shown photographs of men from Dana's old case files, he identified one without hesitation, a man who had been a key suspect in the 1987 drug investigation. That suspect, however, had died in a car accident in the 1990s, taking his secrets with him. The second man he described was still alive, living quietly in another state. When the task force tracked him down and questioned him, he denied everything. But investigators noted his limp, the same detail Delaney had mentioned nearly 4 years earlier. They had no concrete evidence to charge him, but the coincidence was too sharp to ignore. For Caroline, this was confirmation of what she had long believed. Dana hadn't vanished by accident. She had been silenced. In a press conference that summer, Caroline's voice trembled as she said, "My sister was brave enough to stand up to them, and for that, they made her disappear." The case never resulted in formal charges. Too much time had passed, too much evidence lost to decay and cover-up. But in the court of public opinion, the truth was clear. Dana Prescott had been murdered because she had come too close to exposing something powerful, and the system had failed to protect her or bring her killers to justice. Even so, the quarry discovery had given her family the one thing they needed most, the chance to lay her to rest. In the spring of 2009, more than 2 decades after her disappearance, Dana Prescott was finally buried with full honors. Hundreds of officers lined the streets, saluting as her flag-draped casket passed. Caroline, standing at the graveside, whispered through tears, "You're home now, Dana. They can't hide you anymore." The funeral was both a moment of closure and a searing reminder of the injustice that lingered. For investigators, the case remained officially unsolved, but for the family and the public, the truth was undeniable. Dana had been a casualty not just of crime, but of corruption and silence. And that's the haunting lesson here. If Dana, a trained SWAT officer, backed by the power of law enforcement, could be erased so completely for nearly 2 decades, what chance does an ordinary person have? How many other names are buried in quarries, in forests, in unmarked graves, with no one left to tell their story? If you're watching this and you think, someone else will keep these stories alive, you're wrong. If we don't speak their names, they vanish again. Don't let Dana vanish again. Hit subscribe now, because these stories deserve to be told, and the truth deserves to be heard, no matter how long it takes. In the years since Dana's funeral, her case has remained a touchstone in cold case circles, a chilling example of how even the strongest can fall victim to forces larger than themselves. Caroline still advocates for families of the missing, telling anyone who will listen that closure isn't about punishment, it's about answers. You can survive anything if you know the truth, she says. Dana Prescott's disappearance and the eventual discovery of her remains is more than just a story about a missing person. It's a warning about power, silence, and the lengths people will go to keep secrets buried. The uniform in the crushed warehouse, the buried car, the quarry bones, all of it tells us that some stories are meant to be hidden, but they can't stay hidden forever. The desert has its secrets, the forests have theirs, and so did that quiet little quarry. But the truth always fights to the surface. Dana Prescott may have been silenced in life, but in death, her story roared louder than ever. And thanks to those who never stopped searching, her sister, determined investigators, and ordinary people who refused to look away, her voice was finally heard. And now, it's in your hands. Stories like Dana's are not history. They're warnings. If you value truth, if you believe the forgotten deserve a voice, then you cannot leave this page without subscribing. Because if you don't, the silence wins. And silence is exactly what the people who took Dana Prescott wanted. Don't let them win.